The Sphinx's water erosion, proof of a lost civilization. Close your eyes, let your shoulders sink, and allow the world outside to fade into the background. Tonight I'll take you somewhere far from the hum of your day, to a place where stone has stood against time itself. Before we begin, take a deep breath in and let it go. Feel your body soften into wherever you are resting. Let the quiet hold you, and as you settle, tell me, where are you listening from tonight? Perhaps you're in your bed, perhaps in a quiet room with dim light, perhaps somewhere with the sound of rain on your window. Wherever you are, let the thought of it drift into the edges of your mind. You stand in the cool stillness of night. The air is dry, but not empty. It carries a faint scent, like the memory of rain that once fell long ago. In the distance, a shadow rises from the plateau. It is not a building, not a mountain. It is something carved, something shaped by hands. Vast, unmoving, yet alive with a presence that stirs something deep in your chest. You feel the earth beneath your feet, the fine grit of sand shifting with each step you take forward. The stars overhead stretch endlessly, their light spilling over stone that has watched them for millennia. Ahead, the Sphinx waits. Its gaze is fixed toward the horizon, as though it sees something far beyond the reach of human eyes. You step closer, and the desert seems to grow quieter. There is no sound of insects, no rustle of wind in leaves, only the whisper of air against rock, the soft shuffle of your own movement. You almost feel as if you stopped breathing, the entire world would fall completely still. The surface of the stone is rough beneath your fingers when you reach out. You feel ridges, channels, grooves cut deep into its body. Not delicate, not the work of mere decoration. These marks are weather's handwriting. And yet, you know this is Egypt, a place where rain is a stranger. The grooves seem to speak of storms, of water that once fell with such force it carved itself into the very bones of this guardian. The longer you stand there, the more you feel its weight. Not the weight of stone, but the weight of time. How many nights has it stood like this? How many mornings has it greeted the first light of the sun? You imagine the passing centuries, people coming and going, languages rising and vanishing, empires born and dissolved, all while the Sphinx simply watched, silent and unchanging. Your mind drifts to the way the wind feels here. It brushes past you, slow and deliberate, carrying grains of sand that have travelled far across the desert. Each grain has a story, each grain a fragment of something older than memory. And somehow, you feel the Sphinx has gathered those stories, held them in its silent gaze. As you walk around its base, the moonlight shifts across its surface. Shadows gather in the deep cuts along its body. You notice the difference between the smooth parts and the eroded ones, as though the stone itself holds 2 lifetimes. The smoothness belongs to the Egypt you've heard about, the one of pyramids and pharaohs. But the worn, water-cut channels, they belong to something else, something further back, like a voice whispering from before the world we know. It's in this moment, as your hand rests against the cool stone, that you feel both small and infinite at the same time. Small, because this monument was already ancient before your life began. Infinite, because we're just a heartbeat. You sense that you are connected to it. That time is not a straight line, but a circle you're walking inside. You let your eyes close, and the air around you changes. In the darkness behind your eyelids, you hear a different sound. Rain. Heavy, endless rain falling on this same stone centuries, millennia ago. You see the desert not as it is, but as it was, green and open, with rivers cutting through the land. You see people, but not in the clothes of pharaohs or priests. These are older still, their tools simple, their movements purposeful. They carve, they smooth, they create something that will outlive them by ages. You can almost hear their voices, carried on the wind between the drops of rain. When you open your eyes again, the desert night has returned. But now the Sphinx feels different to you. It is no longer just a monument of the known history. It is a survivor of another world entirely. You wonder, if this stone has seen such different ages, how much else has been lost to time? How many civilizations have risen only to vanish without leaving a trace in the records we keep? The thought is both humbling and strangely comforting. Time is vast. The things we know are only a sliver of it. And here you are, resting, listening, letting the quiet pull you into that larger story. The Sphinx stands, not asking for belief, not offering proof, just existing as it always has. Its silence is an invitation, not an answer. Let yourself sink deeper into that silence. Feel the way your breath moves in and out, slow and even. Feel the weight of your body supported, your mind slowing as the night holds you. In this stillness, the questions do not need to be solved. They can simply be carried, like the grains of sand drifting over the desert floor. Somewhere in the distance, the first hint of dawn touches the horizon, but it does not hurry, neither should you. For now we're here together, you, me, and the ancient guardian watching over the endless sands. And perhaps, as you rest, the stories it holds will drift into your dreams, carrying you further into the past than you have ever gone before. And as you breathe and listen and drift, tell me, where are you listening from tonight? The desert is listening too. The night is still wrapped around you like a warm, dark blanket. You haven't moved much, and there's no need to. The desert has its own way of keeping time, not with clocks or numbers, but with the slow breathing of wind over stone. You feel that rhythm now, as if each soft gust is a heartbeat of the land itself. The Sphinx remains before you, unchanged, but somehow more alive the longer you linger. Its face catches the silver light of the moon in such a way that it seems both awake and dreaming. You shift your weight slightly, your feet pressing into the fine sand, and as you do, you can almost imagine the footsteps of others in this place. Thousands of years of visitors, some curious like you, others arriving with offerings, still others simply passing through. They all stood where you stand, gazing up at the same unmoving gaze, wondering much the same questions. How long has it been here? Who made it? And why? Your breath slows. Each inhale draws in the cool night air, tinged with that faint mineral scent of ancient limestone. Each exhale feels like a soft offering to the quiet that surrounds you. Somewhere far off, a jackal cries out, not in alarm, just a single note, as if reminding you that this place belongs as much to the creatures of the desert as it does to stone and memory. In your mind's eye, you step backward through time. The sand under your feet begins to thin away, revealing hard-packed soil, then green fields where the desert now stretches. You watch clouds gather above, thick and heavy, the kind that promise long rains. The sound of the first drop striking stone fills your ears. Slow at first, then building until it is a steady drumming chorus. The rain runs over the body of the Sphinx, following the curves and lines cut by its makers, finding every weakness in the stone. Over centuries, the grooves deepen, not from neglect, but from the endless touch of water. In this vision, there is no desert sun blazing down, only a softer light filtering through clouds. People move about the monument, their clothing different from any you've seen in books. They carry tools, some of stone, some of copper, working on walls and nearby structures. They seem to know the Sphinx well, as though it has already stood for generations in their care. There is no awe in their eyes, no tourist's gaze. This is simply part of their world, as familiar to them as the horizon. But who were they? That question curls into your thoughts, quiet but insistent. You've heard the official story, of course, that the Sphinx was built in the reign of Pharaoh Khafre in the Old Kingdom around 2500 BCE. You've read that it was carved directly from the limestone bedrock, then shaped and smoothed by skilled artisans of the royal court. This is the history written near books, printed in museum guides, taught in classrooms. And yet, as you stand here, the grooves beneath your fingertips tell a different story. The official tale rests on the absence of older records, no inscriptions naming an earlier builder, no clear mention in the earliest dynastic writings. But absence is not proof of non-existence. Just because the record is silent does not mean nothing came before. The Sphinx, with its weathered flanks and softened lines, is itself a kind of record, a record written in stone, in the language of erosion and time. You think of the geologist Robert Schoch, who once stood here and studied the weathering patterns. He saw not the marks of desert wind, but the unmistakable signature of long, sustained rainfall. According to his training, such erosion could not have happened in the climate of the last 5,000 years. For Egypt to see such rain, the calendar would need to roll back to a time long before the pharaohs, perhaps 7, 8, or even 9,000 years ago. That would place the carving of the Sphinx in a world we know almost nothing about. The thought is dizzying, like staring down a deep well where the bottom is lost in shadow. If Schoch's theory holds, then the builders of the Sphinx belong to a civilization predating every known chapter of Egyptian history. Who were they? Where did they come from? And what became of them? Did they vanish suddenly, swept away by some great change in the Earth's climate? Or did they fade slowly, their knowledge dissolving over generations until nothing remained but their monuments? The desert around you seems to lean in, listening as you ponder. You imagine the Nile Valley before the rise of the great dynasties, a lush place, crisscrossed with rivers and lakes, home to animals now long gone from these sands. Perhaps in that age the Sphinx was not alone. Perhaps it stood among other structures, smaller or greater, built of stone and wood and earth. Time has a way of stripping away what is fragile, leaving behind only the strongest bones of a world. Your fingers brush another section of the monument's body. The stone here feels different, smoother, newer, as though replaced or repaired. Archaeologists have noted such patches, blocks fitted in by later dynasties trying to restore what age had worn away. But these repairs too are weathered. This means that even in the earliest known centuries of Egypt's history, the Sphinx was already considered old, in need of mending. The moon drifts lower, its light growing softer. Shadows lengthen along the flanks of the Sphinx. You step back, gazing up at its face. Some say it once bore the likeness of a different ruler, later recarved to match the face of Khafre. Others believe it never represented a human ruler at all, but something older, a guardian spirit, a god, or perhaps an ideal of strength and watchfulness. You let your eyes wander over its features. The heavy brow, the straight mouth, the great paws stretched before it. There is power in its stillness, a kind of patience that feels almost beyond human. It is not waiting for anything in particular. It is simply here, as it has always been, as it will be for as long as the desert allows. A breath of wind passes over you, cool and carrying the scent of distant sand. You realize you've been here a long time now, though the idea of time seems to matter less and less. In the desert night, there is no hurry. The questions you carry do not need answers all at once. They can rest, like you are resting now, in the gentle space between knowing and wondering. So you breathe again, slowly. Let your shoulders relax. Let the night air fill your lungs and feel it drift away as you exhale. The stone before you hums in the quiet, not with sound, but with presence. Somewhere in its silent memory is the truth of its making, and though that truth may never be spoken aloud, you feel it still, like the low thrum of the earth beneath your feet. The stars wheel slowly overhead. The Sphinx keeps its watch, and you, for now, are simply here with it, held in the stillness, your body calm, your mind drifting gently toward the next story it will share. The air feels a little cooler now, as if the night has deepened into its most silent hours. You stand without hurry, your body soft, your breath slow. The sand beneath your feet shifts slightly, and you can almost imagine that each movement is a conversation with the ground. Your weight pressing into the earth pressing back in quiet acknowledgement. You keep your eyes on the Sphinx, the moonlight tracing its lines, its contours, its scars. You know the official story by now, the one that fills the textbooks and the museum placards. The Sphinx was carved in the reign of Pharaoh Khafre, the son of Khufu, around 2500 BCE. The evidence presented is tidy. The monument sits beside the pyramid complex attributed to Khafre. The face resembles his known statues, and the craftsmanship matches the Old Kingdom style. The narrative is neat, precise, easy to teach. And yet, as the stillness stretches, you feel a quiet resistance to that simplicity. Perhaps it's the grooves along the Sphinx's flanks, deep and irregular, so unlike the wind-carved patterns you've seen on other monuments. Or perhaps it's the strange absence of clear references in early Egyptian records. The way the Sphinx seems to step into history already old, already burdened with centuries of mystery. You imagine the Fourth Dynasty workers chiseling away at the stone, shaping and smoothing the pores, perhaps repairing what time had already begun to erode. You picture them working in the harsh sunlight, the sound of hammers echoing across the plateau. But even in this imagined scene, you can't quite make them the original creators. There's difference between building something from raw stone and tending to something that has stood long before you. Your mind drifts to the surrounding landscape as it might have been in that official version of history. The Giza Plateau would have been bustling, teams of labourers hauling blocks, craftsmen carving hieroglyphs, overseers marking progress. Khafre's pyramid rising nearby, grand and deliberate. The Sphinx would stand as a guardian, a symbolic sentinel watching over the tomb of the king. It is a story that feels grand, yes, but not entirely whole. The night air shifts again, carrying the scent of dust and limestone. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the desert take you somewhere older still. When you open them, you're standing in a place that feels familiar, but not quite the same. The sky is heavier, full of thick clouds. The ground is damp beneath your feet, the grass bending softly in the wind. The air hums with the sound of insects and distant water, And there it is, the Sphinx, but newer, sharper. The lines of its face are unbroken, the details of its headdress crisp and flawless. The stone is pale and bright, untouched by the long centuries of erosion you know so well. Around it, the land is alive with activity, but the people here are not dressed in linen kilts or the ornaments of Pharaoh's court. Their garments are rougher, their tools simpler, but their movements are precise, their purpose clear. They work with a familiarity that suggests this is not a project of glory, but of duty. You notice the way they speak to each other, not loudly, but in measured tones, as if the work is sacred. You try to listen to their words, but they are in a language you do not recognize, one that feels older than anything preserved in writing. And then, almost as if in response to your listening, the scene shifts again. You see the Sphinx standing alone in the rain, the workers gone, the ground already softening under the weight of endless storms. The water runs down its body, following the channels that will thousands of years later catch the attention of a modern geologist. The vision fades, and you are back in the desert night. The moon hangs lower now, and the stars seem brighter in its absence. The Sphinx before you is once again weathered and silent, its expression unreadable. And you, standing in the same spot as before, feel the thin thread that connects the present to a time far beyond recorded history. You think again of how the official history came to be. Much of it is based on proximity, the Sphinx's position near Khafra's pyramid, the stylistic similarities, the absence of earlier records. But absence is a tricky thing to interpret. History is a net, and much slips through its weave. Whole civilizations can vanish without leaving a clear trace, their stories erased by the slow grinding of time, climate, and human forgetting. Perhaps that is why some scholars defend the established timeline so fiercely, because to admit a gap is to admit a vast ocean of the unknown. It is easier maybe to keep the lines neat and the dates certain. But the Sphinx resists such certainty. Its body is a contradiction in stone, a riddle carved into the earth itself. You run your hand once more along the grooves in its side, feeling the smooth arcs where water once flowed. You think of how rare rain is here now, how unimaginable it would be to see the desert soaked and streaming. And yet these marks speak of that world as clearly as any photograph. The climate that shaped them is gone, and the world that knew the Sphinx in that form is gone with it. The stillness deepens around you, and you feel your breath grow slower still. There is a comfort in not needing to solve the riddle tonight. You can simply hold it, like a smooth stone in your hand, knowing it is part of something vast and ancient. You can let the question stay open, like the desert sky above you. No edges, no walls, just space for wonder to breathe. The Sphinx does not offer answers, only presence. And that presence is enough to quiet the restless part of your mind. You feel your eyelids grow heavy, your body sinking deeper into the moment. The hum of the desert, the coolness of the night, the soft light of the moon. All of it weaves together into something steady and soothing. Somewhere beyond the plateau, the horizon is beginning to think of dawn, but it is still far away. You have time to stand here, time to listen, time to drift between the stories told in books and the stories written in stone. And perhaps, if you stay just a little longer, the Sphinx will show you more of the world it remembers, a world no record has ever kept, but which still lives in the quiet spaces between the wind and the rock. The desert holds its breath. Somewhere far away, a faint ripple of wind stirs the sand. But here, at the base of the Sphinx, the air is still and heavy, as though the moment itself refuses to move forward. You stand in that stillness, your body soft, your thoughts slowed to a gentle drift. The night has become a cocoon, wrapping you in quiet, and the monument before you seems to grow taller, its presence deepening into the very earth. You know by now that Egypt's climate is not one of rain. In the modern world, the Nile Valley is dry and bright, its skies clear most of the year. A brief shower might come once in a long while, but it passes quickly, leaving no mark on the stone. For thousands of years this has been the way of the land, a dry, enduring desert, and yet here before you is the undeniable evidence. Deep vertical channels, rounded edges, softened stone where water once poured in sheets. The marks are not random. They are too deliberate in shape, too consistent in depth. They do not match the delicate lacework of wind erosion you've seen on other monuments and cliff faces. Instead, they speak of a force more patient, more persistent, rainfall over centuries, perhaps even millennia. In the quiet of the night, you trace one groove with your fingertips, imagining the steady flow of water that once travelled down this path, drop after drop, storm after storm. You close your eyes, and the desert around you changes again. The sand underfoot fades into rich soil. You hear the soft patter of rain growing louder, until it is a steady song against the stone. The air is warmer, humid, and alive with the scent of wet earth. Around you stretches not a barren plateau, but a landscape dotted with streams and patches of greenery. The Sphinx in this vision is not a weathered relic, but a freshly carved guardian, its lines sharp, its surface unbroken. The rain slicks its body, running in shining rivulets down its flanks, pooling at its base before sinking into the soft ground. This is not the Egypt of your history books. This is something older, something belonging to a time before the endless dryness set in. It is a world that feels distant and yet strangely close, as if it could be reached by taking just one step further into the dream. The people of this world walk past the Sphinx without hesitation. They know it well. To them, it is not a mystery but a part of their daily lives, a fixture as constant as the rising sun. But then the vision shifts again. The rain stops, the clouds drift away, and the sky becomes the pale, blazing blue of the desert. The green retreats, the streams vanish, and the air grows dry. The Sphinx stands as it always has, but now the marks of the rain remain etched in its body. The people who once maintained it are gone. The desert takes over, laying its golden cloak across the land. The monument waits. You open your eyes, and you are back in the present. The night is the same, but the silence feels heavier now, as though it holds the memory of all those lost ages. You think about how, according to the official record, none of this could be true. The rainfall, the green land, the earlier civilization. The accepted history tells a different tale, that the Sphinx has stood here only since the time of Khafra, watching over his pyramid and serving as a symbol of his reign. And yet, the stone beneath your hand feels older than that. It feels like it belongs to a story whose first chapters have been torn out. You can almost see the gap in the record, like a missing piece of a puzzle. The evidence is here, carved into the monument's very bones, but the narrative told to the world skips over it, filling the silence with a more convenient truth. You think of the scholars who have walked this same ground, some of them convinced that the water erosion is proof of a much older origin. Robert Schoch is only one name among many who have stood against the orthodox view, pointing to the geology, the patterns of wear, the climate records. Their arguments have been met with resistance, sometimes even ridicule, as if the very idea of rewriting history is too heavy a burden to bear. Perhaps it is. To acknowledge the Sphinx as older than 2500 BCE would be to admit that an advanced culture existed here long before the rise of the pharaohs. It would be to accept that humanity's timeline is not a straight upward climb, but something more complicated, a series of rises and falls, of civilizations lost and rediscovered. Such an admission would ripple through every corner of our understanding, changing the way we see ourselves and our place in the world. The desert night stretches around you, vast and timeless. You feel the weight of these thoughts, but not as a burden. Here, they are simply part of the stillness, resting alongside the stars and the stone. You let your gaze wander over the Sphinx once more, following the curve of its body, the way the light and shadow play across its surface. The monument feels patient. It has been misunderstood before, and it will be misunderstood again. It does not rush to explain itself. It simply stands, waiting for those who are ready to see. Perhaps that is the lesson it offers, that some truths are not meant to be hurried toward. They reveal themselves slowly, in their own time, like the slow carving of water into rock. You breathe in the cool night air, holding it for a moment before letting it go. Your body feels heavier now, more relaxed, as though the quiet has seeped into your bones. The Sphinx remains still, but in its stillness is a kind of movement, the shifting of thoughts, the slow turning of understanding. Far in the distance, the first hint of dawn brushes the horizon, a faint silver light. But here, by the Sphinx, the night still belongs to you. The questions remain unanswered, the mystery unbroken, and that is somehow enough. You feel yourself drifting, not just in thought, but in a way that makes the edges of the world blur. The stone, the shadow, the silence, they hold you, and you let yourself be held. Somewhere in the depths of the quiet, the sound of rain returns. It is not real, not here in this desert, but it is real enough in your mind. You hear it falling on the stone, see it running through the grooves, feel it soaking the earth at your feet. And in that sound, in that imagined storm, you catch a glimpse of the world that once was, and perhaps the world that the Sphinx was carved to remember. The stars overhead seem sharper now, as if the desert air has polished them while you weren't looking. They hang above the Sphinx like silent witnesses, their light gliding over the curves of the monument's body, catching in the deeper cuts along its sides. The stone holds these shadows the way it holds the memory of rain, patiently, without hurry, as though time itself moves differently here. You stand a little closer tonight, close enough to see the fine textures in the rock, the subtle shifts between smooth surfaces and the weathered scars carved by water so long ago. You think of Robert Schoch again, that lone figure in the early 1990s walking around this same body of stone, running his hands over the same channels you now trace. He was trained to read rock the way a historian reads old parchment, finding meaning in every line, every fracture. And what he read here didn't match the official words in the textbooks. It wasn't a message written in hieroglyphs or an inscription naming a king. It had older, deeper, more elemental. These grooves were not the work of wind and sand. They were the signature of rain, long sustained rainfall, Rainfall like that hasn't touched this land in over 7,000 years. 7,000! You let that number sit in your mind, stretching it out like a long road. It reaches far past the pyramids, past the first dynasties, past even the earliest farming villages along the Nile. To stand here and imagine the Sphinx in that distant time is to step into a world almost erased from human memory, a time when the desert was green, when rivers wound through the land, when the climate itself sang a different song. You close your eyes and let yourself drift toward that forgotten age. The air around you thickens, warm and damp. The skies are soft grey, heavy with clouds that press low over the land. You hear the sound of rain again, not a brief shower, but a steady, unending fall, the kind that soaks the earth and makes the air taste of life. The Sphinx in this vision is new and unbroken, its lines sharp and its face untouched by centuries of wind. The rain runs down its sides in gleaming streams, pooling at its pores before disappearing into the dark soil. People move through this scene, not the robed priests or kilted workers you know from Egyptian murals, but others. Their clothes are woven from heavier fabrics, their tools a mix of stone and something brighter, perhaps copper. They move with a quiet assurance, not rushing, not wasting energy. You watch them work, not carving the Sphinx, but tending to it, clearing debris, shaping the ground around it, strengthening the platform it rests on. This is not the birth of the monument. This is care, maintenance, devotion to something already ancient even then. When you open your eyes, the night has returned, and the air is once again dry and cool. The vision fades like breath on glass, but the feeling it leaves behind lingers. You begin to wonder if what Shock found here is only part of the truth. If the erosion marks speak of rain from 7,000 years ago, then the Sphinx must have been standing even before that time, long enough before for the water to work its way deep into the stone. How far back does that take us? 10,000 years? More? The thought makes the hair on your arms rise, not in fear, but in awe. The Orthodox history resists this. It leans on the neat connection to Khafra's pyramid, the artistic resemblance between the Sphinx's face and the king's statues. But stone can be recarved. Faces can be changed. A guardian older than memory could be reshaped to resemble a ruler of the day, the old world sentinel reborn in the image of a new king. That would explain why the monument's body tells one story, while its face tells another. You walk slowly around the base, the sand crunching softly under your steps. The moonlight reveals the repairs made by ancient hands, blocks set into the eroded stone, their edges still visible even after centuries. Some of these repairs are themselves worn down, proof that they were made not in recent centuries but far back in antiquity. This means that the earliest Egyptians you read about in history books were already inheriting something weathered and old, something whose original builders were gone. The quiet around you feels thicker now, like the desert is holding its breath as you piece the thought together. This would mean that the civilization which carved the Sphinx left no written record we've found, no direct trace in the artifacts we've catalogued, and yet, here is their work, too vast and precise to be dismissed as the labour of a small, wandering tribe. Whoever they were, they knew how to shape stone on a massive scale. They knew how to anchor a structure so deeply that it would outlast earthquakes, floods, and the shifting sands of time. A chill moves through you, though the night is not cold. It comes from the realization that our story of humanity might be missing entire chapters filled with cities, art, and knowledge that vanished in the turning of ages. We think of history as a line, moving forward from simple beginnings to complex societies. But perhaps it is more like the tide, surging forward and then pulling back, washing away entire worlds before rising again. You place your palm flat against the stone, feeling its coolness seep into your skin. The grooves under your hand are soft at the edges, worn down by time, yet they still hold the shape carved by that ancient rain. You think of the storms, the rivers, the green valleys that must have once surrounded this place. The Sphinx would have seen it all, and now it sees you, another brief visitor in the long stream of years. Above you, the stars are wheeling slowly westward. The night is not over yet, but the faintest paling of the horizon hints at the dawn to come. Still, you remain here, letting the monument's silence speak for itself. It doesn't need to explain the rain marks or the missing centuries. It knows that truth endures whether or not it is spoken aloud. Your breath falls into the rhythm of the desert, slow, even, unhurried. The weight of the world outside this moment fades away, leaving only you, the Sphinx, and the quiet pulse of history stretching in all directions. The questions remain: who carved it, when, and why? But here in the stillness, the need for answers loosens its grip. The mystery itself becomes a kind of comfort, a reminder that the world is larger, older, and more wondrous than we can see all at once. The wind stirs again, carrying the faintest whisper of sand across the stone. You think you can hear the echo of that ancient rain in its sound, a ghost of the storms that once shaped this guardian. You close your eyes, and for a moment, you're standing in both worlds at once. The dry desert night and the green, rain-washed land of the distant past. The Sphinx is there in both, unchanging, eternal, its gaze fixed on something beyond the horizon, something you can almost imagine if you let your mind drift far enough. And so you do. You drift. You let the lines of time blur. You let the stone's quiet presence guide you into that soft space between waking and dreaming. The desert breathes, and you breathe with it, slow and deep, carrying the weight of 10,000 years in the gentle rise and fall of your chest. The night feels deeper now, as if you've stepped into the center of its quiet heart. The Sphinx towers beside you, its shadow stretched long across the sand, the moonlight pouring down over its face like a slow silver tide. You're close enough to see the faint layering of limestone in its body, the ancient fractures, the softened edges where centuries of rain once passed. The air is perfectly still, as though even the wind is pausing to listen to the unspoken conversation between you and this monument. The thought returns, the unsettling implication that has been whispering at the edge of your mind since you first placed your hand on this stone. If these marks were made by heavy rainfall, and if that rainfall belongs to a climate thousands of years older than the pharaohs, then the Sphinx is not a monument of the Old Kingdom at all. It is a survivor from a time before the Egypt we know existed. That realization hangs in the air like the low hum of something too vast to fully grasp. You try to measure that age in your mind. If the rain erosion dates back 7 or even 9,000 years, then the Sphinx may have been carved before the invention of writing, before the first known cities rose along the Tigris, Euphrates, or Nile. This would place it in the realm of deep prehistory, a time historians often imagine as a world of small, scattered tribes. And yet here stands this colossal guardian, precise in proportion, aligned perfectly with the rising sun. Such skill, such permanence, is not the work of a few wandering groups. It hints at something larger, something organized, a culture with resources, knowledge, and vision. The official history doesn't speak of this. In that version, the Sphinx was born in the mind of Pharaoh Khafre, carved by his workers from the limestone bedrock as part of a grand funerary complex. Its body, its face, its purpose, all tied neatly to the age of the pyramids. But when you stand here, breathing the same night air that wraps around this monument, that tidy story feels incomplete. You sense layers beneath it, like the sediment in the rock itself, the surface layer carefully shaped by dynastic hands. But beneath it, an older story carved long before the first pharaoh claimed this plateau. You walk slowly along its side, your fingers brushing over the stone. Each groove feels like a memory you can almost recall, the kind that lingers just out of reach. You picture the water running through them, not a flash flood, not a sudden storm, but centuries of steady seasonal rain. You imagine the land it fell upon, green ridges where now there are dunes, herds of animals grazing along banks of rivers long vanished. You imagine a people who lived here not as desert dwellers, but as river folk, farmers, builders, perhaps astronomers watching the sky in a way that guided their monuments. Your thoughts wander to other ancient places, Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, buried for thousands of years, the great stone circles in Britain, the megaliths scattered across the Pacific. So many of them seem to appear suddenly in history, without a clear lineage of development, as if the knowledge to build them simply arrived and then disappeared again. Could the Sphinx be another of these silent echoes? Not an isolated wonder, but part of a greater pattern, a trace of civilizations older than we dare to imagine? The silence around you deepens. You find yourself slowing even more, letting each step be deliberate, each breath measured. The Sphinx, bathed in moonlight, seems to share its stillness with you. Its gaze is fixed far beyond the desert, perhaps on something that no longer exists in the physical world, a memory, a star, a time long gone. And then you think of the people who came after the supposed builders, the earliest dynastic Egyptians who first wrote about this land, the priests and kings who walked beneath the same gaze you now feel. Did they know the Sphinx's true origin, or did they inherit it already shrouded in mystery as we have? Perhaps they too speculated, telling stories of gods who shaped it, or of a first time Zep-Tepi, when divine beings walked the earth. That phrase drifts through your mind now, the first time. The old myths say it was an age when knowledge was given to humanity by those who came before, when the world was young and the climate was different. Could those myths be distorted memories of a real, lost civilization? Could the Sphinx be the last voice of that age, speaking not in words, but in the language of stone and shadow? You stop in front of its great paws, half buried in the sand. Even here, where the wind has scoured the surface for thousands of years, the scale is humbling. Each paw is the size of a house. You can almost see the ancient hands that shaped them, the tools rising and falling, the dust clinging to sweat-soaked skin. Were those hands the same ones that built the first cities, or were they hands belonging to a people we no longer even name? The night seems to lean in closer, the stars pressing down with their cold, endless light. You feel the weight of time not as a burden, but as a kind of shelter, a vast expanse of years in which this monument has simply existed, untouched by the rise and fall of nations. The Sphinx has seen droughts and floods, peace and war, birth and ruin. It has watched human belief shift and change, yet it has never moved, never spoken, never revealed its true age. You breathe in the desert air, dry and cool, and feel it settle inside you. Your body is heavy now, your limbs loose, your mind drifting into the kind of quiet that comes only in the presence of something eternal. The Sphinx seems to draw that stillness from you, or perhaps it shares its own stillness with you, a trade between the present and the deep past. Somewhere beyond the horizon, dawn is waiting. But here, beneath the watch of this guardian, time is not a straight path. It circles and folds, and you're caught in its gentle loop. You can almost hear the sound of that ancient rain again, feel it on your skin, see it running over pale, freshly carved stone. You can almost see the faces of the ones who shaped it, though they fade before you can name them. Perhaps that is the way it is meant to be. Perhaps the Sphinx's purpose is not to be fully understood, but to remind us that there are mysteries which cannot be captured in words or dates. Mysteries that must be felt in the bones, in the slowing of breath, in the way the night air holds its weight. So you let go of the questions for now. You simply stand here, breathing with the desert, feeling the stone's cool presence beside you. The Sphinx does not need to speak. It has already told you everything it can, in the grooves on its body, in the way it faces the rising sun, in the silence that surrounds it. The rest is left to your dreams and to the slow turning of time. And as you stand in that silence, you know this moment, this night, will stay with you, the way the rain once stayed in the stone. The moon has begun its slow descent, drawing the shadows longer across the plateau. The light has shifted, softer now, pooling in the hollows and slipping over the weathered ridges of the Sphinx's body. You stand before it, your breathing unhurried, your body loose, the desert stillness seeping into you as if it were an old friend wrapping you in a quiet embrace. You think of the scholars who defend the Orthodox story, the guardians of Egypt's official history. In their eyes, the Sphinx's scars are the work of sand and wind, not water. They speak with certainty. For thousands of years, the desert's breath has scoured the limestone, carving these grooves and softening the edges. To them, the monument's age fits neatly into the reign of Khafre, its purpose tied to its pyramid and his glory. They see no reason to look further back. It is a story that works on paper. The desert winds are powerful. The sand they carry can cut into rock like 1,000 tiny blades. Over centuries, such forces can shape even the hardest stone. And here, on the plateau, the winds sweep in with nothing to slow them, striking the monument's flanks over and over. From that perspective, the explanation feels complete, logical, tidy, safe. But as you stand here, the stone beneath your fingertips tells you something different. You have walked among other monuments on this plateau, other temples and tombs carved from similar limestone. Their surfaces shaped by the same winds show patterns of erosion. Yes, but not like this. Their lines are horizontal, shallow, the marks of air and grit. The Sphinx's flanks are cut deep and vertical, as though something heavier and more fluid once poured across them. The wind leaves lace, rain leaves rivers, and here, in the quiet of the night, you can see the difference as clearly as the line between earth and sky. You imagine those winds, warm, dry, relentless, wrapping around the Sphinx for centuries, carrying whispers of distant sands. They have shaped it, yes, but they have also polished its scars, smoothing the water's ancient work into the softened grooves you see now. It is a collaboration of forces, not a single author. The wind may have kept the stone awake all these years, but it was the rain that first wrote its story. Your thoughts drift to the men and women who dedicate their lives to studying this monument, each carrying their own belief about its origin. In the world of archaeology, these debates can be fierce, not just about dates and erosion patterns, but about the very nature of history itself. To accept that the Sphinx could be far older than Khafra's reign would mean rewriting entire chapters of human civilization. It would mean admitting that knowledge, skill, and organization on a grand scale existed long before we believe it could have. And that is no small thing to admit. Careers have been built on the current timeline. Museums have arranged their exhibits to tell a particular story. Textbooks around the world teach that human progress is a steady climb from primitive beginnings to modern complexity. To find an advanced monument standing thousands of years earlier is to throw that neat staircase into disarray. The climb would not be steady at all, but full of hidden rises and sudden falls, like the tides of a vast and restless sea. The air feels cooler now, brushing against your skin in long, slow breaths. You shift your gaze upward, tracing the curve of the Sphinx's face against the sky. There is an elegance to its stillness, a refusal to bow to either story, wind or rain, Khafra or an older civilization. It simply remains, letting others argue over its past while it keeps its own counsel. Perhaps it knows that the truth is larger than any single version we can hold. You think of all the ages the Sphinx has watched, the dynasties rising and falling, the invasions and the peace, these centuries when sand swallowed its body so deeply that only its head was visible. You think of the times it has been dug out, repaired, repainted, revered, and neglected. Every era has left its mark, yet the core of it, the silent watcher beneath the changing faces of history, has endured. The wind stirs the sand at your feet, lifting it in soft spirals before letting it settle again. You watch it move and wonder if, someday, the Sphinx will be covered completely, sleeping beneath the dunes for another 1,000 years before someone else uncovers it and wonders the same questions you do tonight. That thought doesn't bring sadness, only a strange comfort. Even if it disappears for a time, it will still be here, waiting, holding its secrets until the next listener arrives. You step closer, running your hand along the stone once more. The texture is uneven, some places rough, others worn smooth. You pause at a particularly deep groove, your fingers fitting easily into its curve. You imagine the water that once ran here, the storms that fed it, the climate that allowed it to fall year after year. You imagine the people of that time looking at the Sphinx not as a ruin, not as an artifact, but as something alive in their own present, a monument that belonged fully to them, as it now belongs fully to the desert. A soft quiet settles over you, the kind that makes your shoulders loosen and your breath slow without your even noticing. The arguments of scholars, the competing timelines, the measurements and photographs, they all feel far away now. Here, in the night, the Sphinx is not an academic puzzle, but a presence, and that presence asks nothing of you except to stand and witness. The stars turn slowly overhead. You wonder how many of them have shifted in the sky since the Sphinx was new. The earth itself moves on its long, slow cycles, tilting and turning, changing the way the heavens appear over the centuries. Perhaps the constellations that look down on its creation are not the same ones we see now. Perhaps the Sphinx remembers a sky we have never known. The thought makes your breath deepen even more, and you feel your body heavy, anchored to the earth beneath you. The coolness of the stone under your palm seems to seep into you, pulling you into its calm. You think of the wind, of the rain, of the hands that shaped this guardian, and of the countless eyes that have met its gaze over thousands of years. All of them are part of its story, just as you are now. You let the stillness hold you there, the night thick around you, the Sphinx unmoving beside you. You don't need to decide which version of history is correct. You don't need to solve the riddle tonight. The answers, if they exist, are safe in the stone, and the stone will keep them far longer than you could. And so you stand, breathing with the desert, until your thoughts blur into the darkness, and the Sphinx's gaze feels as familiar as your own heartbeat. The night has taken on a softer shade now. The moon hangs low, a pale lantern drifting toward the western horizon, and its light catches in the edges of the Sphinx's features like water running along a ridge. The shadows stretch across the sand in long ribbons, and the air feels even cooler against your skin. You're not sure how long you've been here. Time has slowed, folded in on itself, and in this stillness minutes and centuries feel the same. You walk slowly around the base, the sound of your steps hushed in the fine sand. You pause often, letting your hand trace the stone's uneven surface, feeling the way the grooves deepen here, narrow there, as if telling a story that changes with every step. And in that story, one chapter seems to speak louder than the others, the chapter the orthodox view tries to explain away. The defenders of the official history insist these are not rain marks, but the work of wind and sand. They say the vertical channels are the result of softer layers in the limestone eroding faster than harder ones, a process that could happen in arid conditions. They point to the consistency of the stone's layers, to patterns seen in other desert formations, and to the lack of undeniable evidence for a wetter climate in this exact spot during the monument's construction. But those who argue for water point out that the shapes here don't match other wind-worn monuments. They note how the stone is undercut in places, smoothed in others, in a way wind cannot easily achieve. They speak of the rounded edges and the channels that curve gently, as if worn by a constant flow. Rain leaves its own signature, they say, and the Sphinx bears it. You find yourself caught between these voices, the steady confidence of the orthodox scholars and the quiet persistence of those who see an older, wetter Egypt. But as you stand here, fingertips resting in one of those deep grooves, you realize the stone itself isn't arguing. It isn't defending one truth or the other. It's simply holding its marks, the way a tree holds rings within its trunk. The marks don't try to prove anything. They just are. You take a step back, letting your eyes roam over the monument from a little distance. In the moonlight, the contrast between its head and body becomes more striking. The head, better preserved, seems sharper in detail, its surface less ravaged by erosion. The body, by contrast, is heavily worn, its lines blurred and softened. To some, this difference is further evidence that the body is far older, carved in an age of rain, while the head may have been recarved later, perhaps even reshaped entirely into the likeness of Khafra, giving the Guardian a new identity for a new age. The idea isn't hard to imagine. You picture the Sphinx before such a recarving. Perhaps its face was different, its expression older, less human. Perhaps it wore the features of a lion entirely. or of some now forgotten deity. Then, in a time when the pharaoh wanted a monument to guard his pyramid, the ancient stone was reshaped, its mystery partly erased but never fully silenced. The thought makes you pause, your breath slow and even. If this is true, then what you see tonight is a palimpsest, a rewriting of an older message. Beneath the face of a pharaoh lies something older, like a voice whispering under another's words. And perhaps that's why the Sphinx feels the way it does, not as a single story carved in stone, but as a layering of lives, each one leaving its own mark. The wind stirs faintly, carrying the scent of the desert. It brushes your cheek, a cool reminder of where you are, a place where nights are gentle, but days can burn. You think of the countless seasons this guardian has endured, the rain that once fell on it, the centuries of heat and wind that followed. Through it all, it has remained. The weather has shaped it. The hands of kings and workers have mended it, but nothing has moved it from this place. You move to its front, standing between its massive paws. From here, the monument looms above you, its gaze fixed far beyond your own. There's a weight to this position, a sense that you've stepped into the same space countless others have occupied, each with their own thoughts, their own questions. You wonder what the priests of the old kingdom saw when they looked up here, or what a traveller from another land thought when they first approached this strange figure rising from the sand. Did they sense the same quiet power you feel now? Did they hear the same unspoken question in its silence? Your hand rests on one of the paws. The stone is cooler here, the surface smoother in places where it has been restored. Restoration work has been done over and over throughout the centuries, each generation trying to preserve what time keeps trying to take back. And in those repairs, you see another kind of layering, not just the layering of histories, but of care. For thousands of years, people have felt this guardian was worth saving, worth guarding in turn. That thought is strangely comforting. The night sky stretches above you, deep and endless. The stars are scattered in patterns you can't help but connect into shapes, as people have done since the first fires were lit. You imagine the constellations seen by the earliest builders, how different they must have been after thousands of years of Earth's slow, steady turning. The Sphinx has watched the stars shift, the planets wander, the moon's endless cycle of return. It has seen skies we cannot see, and it will see skies we will never know. You let that thought settle into you, feeling it expand and slow your breath even more. You're standing beside something that measures its life in millennia, not in years. The human arguments about its age, the debates and theories, they're just moments in its long watch. The Sphinx has no need to join those debates. It will still be here when new theories rise and fall, when the names of scholars are forgotten, when the wind has written new lines into its body. Your eyes close for a moment, and you let the silence stretch. In the dark behind your lids, you hear the soft patter of imagined rain again, the same rain that first cut these grooves into the stone. You hear it falling steadily, endlessly, as though it's still happening somewhere in the memory of the world. The rain becomes a kind of lullaby, pulling you deeper into the stillness until you can almost feel the ancient green land beneath your feet again. When you open your eyes, the desert night hasn't changed, but you have. The stone feels warmer under your palm now, as if it's keeping some small piece of that rain alive inside it. You step back, taking in the full shape of the Sphinx once more, It stands in its patient way, neither confirming nor denying the stories told about it. It doesn't need to. Its truth is written into its presence, and that is enough. The horizon still holds the darkness of night, but there's a faint silver line far to the east, a quiet promise of dawn. You know the light will change everything, the colours of the stone, the shadows, even the feeling in the air. But for now you are here in this soft, timeless moment, the questions still unanswered, the mystery still intact, and the Sphinx still watching. The air feels cooler now, though it's not cold, a softness that comes just before the slow bloom of dawn. The moon has lowered almost to the horizon, and the first hint of pale light brushes the eastern sky. Yet here, at the base of the Sphinx, the night still holds you close. The stone is dark in the fading moonlight, but you can still see the lines of its body, the deep grooves carved into its sides, and the patchwork of repairs made over centuries. You stand near its left flank, where the repairs are especially visible. Large blocks cut and set into place break up the continuity of the original limestone. The joins are visible in the moonlight, some tight, some uneven, some filled in with mortar that has long since worn away. These replacement stones are themselves weathered, their surfaces softened by centuries. This, perhaps more than anything else, speaks to the Sphinx's true age. It was already old when the earliest repairs began. You imagine the scene thousands of years ago. Workers arriving with stone hauled from nearby quarries, shaping it to fit into the eroded hollows, anchoring it with whatever binding materials they had. The air would have been filled with the sound of chisels and hammers, the dust rising in clouds. The workers themselves may have looked at the monument with the same wonder you feel now, knowing they were not building something new but preserving something ancient. Perhaps they even spoke quietly among themselves, wondering who had made it and why. The absence of early written records about the Sphinx becomes more striking the more you think about it. The Egyptians were meticulous record keepers. They left inscriptions on temple walls, on stelae, on tombs. They documented their victories, their religious beliefs, their lineages. Yet for all their care in preserving their own stories, they said almost nothing about the Sphinx. No inscription from the Old Kingdom claims its construction. No hieroglyph names its original builder. It is as if it stepped into their world already complete, already wrapped in mystery. You picture the early dynastic rulers coming to this plateau. The pyramids were rising, the temples were taking shape, the great cities along the Nile were thriving, and there, in the midst of all this human ambition, stood the Sphinx, weathered, silent, unclaimed. Did they see it as a gift from the gods? A remnant from the mythical first time when divine beings walked the earth? The myths of Zep Tepi tell of such an era, a golden age before the rise of the dynasties, when the world was ordered and the Nile flowed through a land lush with life. Perhaps the Sphinx was their connection to that lost age. Perhaps it was already ancient even then, its purpose forgotten, its builders gone. The kings of Egypt may have adopted it into their own beliefs, assigning it new meaning, reshaping its face, surrounding it with their own monuments. In doing so, they wove it into the fabric of their own time, even as it kept its older secrets buried in the stone. Your eyes follow the line of its body, the way it stretches out across the sand, paws extended, head raised. There is something animal in its stance, something watchful. It is as if the Sphinx is poised between rest and redness, unmoving yet alert. That duality feels fitting for a monument that exists between worlds, between the wet green Egypt of the past and the dry golden Egypt of the present, between the forgotten civilization that carved it and the ones that later claimed it. You walk slowly toward its rear, where the stone is more heavily eroded. The grooves here are deep enough to fit your hand inside, their edges rounded smooth. In some places, the erosion has cut away so much material that the replacement stones are now more prominent than the original rock. This blending of old and newer stone makes the Sphinx feel like a living thing, patched and mended over time, carrying the marks of its long journey through history. You pause and close your eyes, letting your fingertips rest in one of the grooves. In the darkness, you hear the sound of rain again. It's soft at first, then grows into a steady rhythmic patter. You feel the coolness of it on your skin, smell the freshness of wet earth, hear the distant rush of water moving across the land. You see the Sphinx in that world again, brighter, sharper, untouched by the long centuries of wear. The people around it are strangers to you, their faces unfamiliar, their language unknown, and yet they move with a purpose you understand. They are tending to something they hold sacred. The vision fades slowly, the sound of rain dissolving into the quiet of the desert night. You open your eyes and find the Sphinx before you once more, its body worn but enduring. The absence of its original story no longer feels like an empty space. It feels like an invitation. Perhaps the reason we cannot find its beginnings in the records is because it belongs to a time before records, to a chapter of human history that exists only in stone and memory. The wind shifts gently, brushing against you and stirring the sand at your feet. The air smells faintly of dust, but also of something cleaner, sharper, the scent of limestone cooling in the night. You take a slow breath in, feeling your chest rise and fall in rhythm with the desert's own quiet breathing. You realize that you've begun to think of the Sphinx not just as an artifact, but as a witness. It has seen the green fields and the heavy rains, the first cities and the earliest kings. It has watched empires rise and fall, watched the sand bury it and uncover it again, watched scholars argue and tourists marvel. It has endured every season, every storm, every silence, and through all of it, it has kept the same patient gaze, as if looking towards something it alone remembers. That thought stays with you as you move back toward the front, standing once again between its great paws. The eastern horizon is beginning to pale more noticeably now, and the first faint hints of gold touch the sky. Soon the light will change everything. The colors of the stone, the texture of the air, even the feeling of the place. But for now, the Sphinx remains, as it has through every night for thousands of years, a silent guardian, holding the weight of time in its stillness. You close your eyes again, letting the last moments of night sink into you. The desert is utterly quiet except for the faintest whisper of wind. Your body feels heavy, your breath slow. In this stillness, the unanswered questions do not trouble you. They are simply part of the monument's presence, part of the long, unbroken watch it has kept for ages. When you open your eyes, the dawn is still just a suggestion. You have time yet, time to stand here, to breathe with the desert, to share this moment with the guardian that has seen more of the world than any of us ever will. The stone, the shadow, the silence, they are all here, and they are enough. The horizon is still more shadow than light, but the change has begun. That first delicate band of silver and gold lingers low in the east, like a secret the night can no longer hold. The moon has nearly slipped away, leaving the Sphinx in a softer darkness. It stands as it has for countless mornings, poised to greet the sun, silent and unmoving, its gaze fixed beyond your sight. You stay still for a moment, taking in its presence. There's something about the Sphinx from the front, the way its eyes seem to hold a thought too vast to speak aloud. The face is worn, the nose long gone, yet there is dignity in its shape. In the dim light, the shadows smooth over the damage, and you can almost see it as it must have been in its prime. Strong lines, balanced features, the headdress crisp in detail. But the body tells a different story. You let your gaze drop from the face to the long stretch of its limestone form, worn and grooved by forces that have worked on it for thousands of years. The contrast is striking, as though two different lives have been pressed together into one. This is why so many believe the head may have been reshaped in later times, perhaps recarved to reflect the image of a pharaoh. If that's true, then the Sphinx is not just old. It is layered, its original identity buried beneath centuries of human reinterpretation. Your thoughts drift to the scarcity of ancient references to this monument. In the earliest Egyptian writings that survive, there is no detailed account of its creation. Later inscriptions from the New Kingdom speak of it as Shesepank, the living image. To them, it was already a being with its own spirit, a guardian of the plateau. These texts do not claim its making. They speak of it as though it had always been there, part of the land itself. You recall the story of the dream stele, the large stone slab placed between the paws of the Sphinx by Pharaoh Thutmose IV. Its inscription tells how, as a young prince, he fell asleep in the shadow of the monument and dreamed that it spoke to him. In the dream, the Sphinx promised him the throne if he would clear away the sand that had buried its body. When he awoke, he set to work uncovering it, and in gratitude he placed the stele where it still stands today. The tale is beautiful in its simplicity, but it also reveals something else. By the time of Thutmose IV, the Sphinx was already so old that it had been buried almost entirely in sand. The pharaoh didn't build it, he inherited it, just as others had before him. And if it was ancient to them, then how much more ancient might it truly be? You step forward, closer to the paws, and look up at the small shelter that now protects the dream stele. In the dim light, its carved lines are faint, but you can still imagine the moment it is set here, a gesture of reverence from a ruler to a monument that had watched over his people for untold generations. The Sphinx didn't need Thutmose's recognition. It had already survived longer than any reign, but perhaps the stele was as much for the people as for the monument, a way of saying, this matters. This is worth preserving. The air is cooling more now, that brief dip in temperature that sometimes comes just before dawn. The sand under your feet shifts softly with each movement, a whispering sound that blends into the quiet of the plateau. You move along the Sphinx's side again, your hand brushing the stone as you go. The grooves here feel deeper than before, not in their physical depth, but in the way you notice them, as though the night stillness has tuned you to the monument's language. You imagine how those grooves must have formed. Rainwater spilling down the flanks, seeping into the rock, wearing away the softer layers until they fell away entirely. This kind of erosion doesn't happen quickly. It takes centuries of consistent storms, a climate entirely unlike the Egypt of the last 5,000 years. The thought pulls you backward through time again, past the reign of the pharaohs, past the rise of the first great cities, back to an age when the desert was alive with green, and the Sphinx was perhaps only one of many such monuments. But if there were others, where are they now? Were they swallowed by the sand, eroded to nothing, or dismantled by later generations? Did the people who built them vanish suddenly, or fade slowly until only their works remained? These questions hang in the air, unanswered, as you walk the curve of the Sphinx's body toward its tail. From this angle, the monument feels even larger. Its body stretches behind it, low and massive, like a lion resting yet ready to rise. The tail curls along one side, though it is heavily damaged. Now, you can picture it intact, wrapping neatly around the haunch, the detail crisp, the form whole. The damage is part of its story too, a reminder that even the most enduring creations are not immune to time's hand. You pause, standing near the back, and look out over the desert beyond. In the faint pre-dawn light, the horizon is still a dark line, the land beyond it lost to shadow. It's easy to imagine it as it once was, rolling fields, water glinting in the distance, the air heavy with the scent of rain. The Sphinx in that world would have been a guardian not of sand, but of green and living earth. The thought makes you smile faintly, though you're not sure why. Perhaps because it feels right, that something so enduring, so watchful, would have been born in a place full of life. You take a slow breath, holding it for a moment before letting it go. Your body feels heavier now, your movement slower, as though the stillness of the monument is drawing you into its own rhythm. The light is growing just a little stronger now, and the colour of the stone begins to shift. The pale greys of moonlight are giving way to the warm tones that the sun will soon reveal. This moment, the breath between night and day, feels as though it belongs to the Sphinx. For thousands of years it has stood exactly here, watching this same transition, greeting each sunrise with the same steady gaze. You step back to the front once more, standing where you can see its face framed against the brightening sky. The expression is unreadable, as always, but there is something in its presence that feels aware. Not alive in the way you are, but alive in the way a mountain or a river is alive, enduring, changing slowly, holding the memory of ages. You close your eyes, letting the quiet sink even deeper into you. Somewhere in the distance, you think you hear a faint bird call, the first sign that the day is coming. But here between the paws of the Sphinx, time feels suspended. The questions about its origin, its builders, its true age are still with you. But they no longer feel urgent. They can wait. The monument has waited for millennia. And as you open your eyes again, the horizon glows a little brighter, the promise of the sun just moments away. The Sphinx stands ready, as it always has, as it always will, holding the silence of its own story in the golden air. The horizon is beginning to warm now, and the colours change slowly, deep indigo melting into a faint gold that spreads like ink in water. The night is not gone, but it is retreating. The Sphinx stands in this liminal light, half in shadow, half touched by the first breath of morning. You can see more of its details now, the subtle slopes of its face, the weathered furrows of its body, the places where stone blocks fit like puzzle pieces into eroded hollows. Your thoughts drift to the myths that have floated through the centuries like fragments of an old dream. In Egyptian lore, there is the story of Zep-Tepi, the first time, an era when gods walked the earth and taught humankind the arts of civilization. The ancients spoke of it as a golden age before the rise of the pharaohs, a time when the world was fertile and green, when the Nile flowed strong and the climate was kind. Some said the monuments of that age were shaped by divine hands. Others believed they were the work of humanity's first, most gifted ancestors. You look up at the Sphinx's face and wonder whether it was a creation of that mythical age. Perhaps it was built not as a tomb marker or a political symbol, but as something older, a beacon, a guardian, a reminder of truths that have since slipped away. The myths often tell of a great change, a catastrophe that ended the first time and began the world as we know it. Some speak of floods, others of fire, others still of a slow dying of the land. You let your gaze drift beyond the Sphinx toward the desert that stretches endlessly. It is hard to imagine it green, alive with rivers and forests, but the deep grooves in the Sphinx's body tell you such a world once existed here. And if that world was the stage for the first time, then perhaps the Sphinx was its sentinel, carved to endure whatever came after, a witness planted firmly in stone. The legends speak in symbols, never in dates or measurements. They tell of gods and demigods, of beings who could command the waters and the sky. But you think about what those gods might have been to the people who told these stories. Could they have been the last members of an older, advanced society, their knowledge so far beyond the survivors that it seemed divine? Could the Sphinx be their work, left behind as a message to those who would come after? You imagine that message, not written in a language that could be lost or mistranslated, but carved into a form so immense and enduring that it could speak across millennia without words, a form that would survive flood and drought, empire and collapse, until someday someone might look closely enough to see the truth hidden in its scars. The light strengthens, and the Sphinx's face begins to take on colour, pale gold, soft ochre. You walk slowly to its side again, where the erosion marks are most visible. In the growing light, you see them more clearly, vertical channels smoothed into arcs, grooves that run down in patterns no wind could make. They remind you of ancient tree trunks you've seen in forests, their bark furrowed by centuries of rain. Your hand rests against one groove, and you close your eyes. The desert fades, replaced once more by the sound of rain. It's steady, gentle at first, then heavier, drumming against the stone. You smell the wet limestone, feel the damp air, and see the green land stretching to the horizon. Figures move near the base of the Sphinx, not in linen kilts, not in the ornaments of later dynasties, but in garments of heavier weave, their colours muted and earth-toned. They move with a quiet reverence, their gestures deliberate. You try to hold on to the vision, but it begins to fade like mist, leaving only the Sphinx's shadow in your mind. When you open your eyes, the desert has returned, the light now strong enough to touch the sand with pale warmth. The sound of the imagined rain lingers faintly in your ears, as if the stone itself has been holding that memory for thousands of years. The myths tell of a great flood that swept across the world, a story echoed in cultures far from Egypt, in Mesopotamia, in India, among the ancient peoples of the Americas. The details change, but the theme is constant. The world was remade, and much was lost. If the Sphinx stood through such a catastrophe, the rain marks could be the fingerprints of that transition, carved not just by weather, but by the collapse of an entire age. You step back, taking in the whole monument once more. Its body is the earth, its face the sky, its pores the threshold between what was and what is. You feel an ache of curiosity, not just to know when it was made, but to know what it meant to those who stood here before you. Did they come to it for protection, for remembrance, or simply to feel the weight of time as you do now? The sun is just beginning to rise, a thin edge of gold breaking the horizon. The first rays reach the Sphinx, lighting its face while the body remains in shadow. It's a breathtaking sight, as if the monument has been waiting all night for this exact moment, as it has for countless mornings before. You imagine the ancient builders watching this same light touch the stone, perhaps aligning it deliberately to greet the dawn in a way that spoke to their beliefs about the world and the heavens. In this golden light, the Sphinx no longer looks weathered. For a brief moment, the grooves fade into the glow, and the monument seems whole again. You can almost see it as it was the day it was completed. Fresh carved, sharp-edged, proud against the sky. It's a fleeting vision, but it fills you with a strange peace. The Sphinx has been old for so long that it is easy to forget it was once new, once a creation fresh from the minds and hands of its makers. The wind shifts slightly, warm now, carrying the scent of the day ahead. You take a slow breath, letting the air fill you. The myths will always be myths, stories shaped by memory and imagination. But the stone before you is real, and in its silence, it speaks. Not in clear answers, but in a steady reminder. There is more to our past than we know, more to our story than we have written down. The sun climbs higher, and the shadows begin to shorten. The Sphinx's face is fully lit now, the gold of morning wrapped around it. You stand there, watching the light change the stone, and feel that you have stepped into the oldest conversation in the world, one without words, carried only in the meeting of light, shadow, and time. And in that conversation, the myths are not just tales, they are echoes of rain, of green lands, of people who stood here long before you, and of a guardian who still waits, still remembers. The sun is rising with a quiet grace, spilling light across the plateau in slow, deliberate waves. The sky has shifted fully now, the deep blue of night softening into the warm gold and pale rose of morning. The Sphinx stands in this new light like a being reborn, every line of its face sharper, every shadow along its flanks more defined. In the warmth of the dawn, it looks less like a ruin and more like a survivor. Its scars not flaws but proof of endurance. You find yourself thinking not just of Egypt, but of other places across the world where stone holds mysteries. The Sphinx's story, or the lack of a clear story, is not unique. There are other sites scattered far beyond the desert that speak in the same language of impossibility. Places where the dates in the textbook seem to fit poorly against the evidence the earth presents. You think of Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, a series of stone circles carved with animals and symbols, built more than 11,000 years ago, long before agriculture was supposed to have taken root. Archaeologists found it buried under layers of soil, preserved as though someone had intentionally hidden it. Its builders remain nameless, their culture erased, yet their work is as deliberate and skilled as any from later civilizations. Your mind drifts to Nan Madol, the mysterious city built atop a coral reef in Micronesia, with basalt columns stacked like giant logs, each weighing several tons. No one knows for certain who built it or why, only that it was abandoned long before Europeans arrived. And then to the towering statues of Easter Island, the Moai gazing inland with silent expressions, their purpose still debated. These places feel like distant relatives of the Sphinx, scattered siblings in a family of enigmas. Each one stands outside the neat lines of human history, existing in the spaces where our certainty falters. They hint that our story might be far older, more complex, more cyclical than we have believed. The sunlight on the Sphinx strengthens, revealing the rough texture of its limestone. You step closer, running your hand over the surface. The warmth of the stone feels like an echo of the sun's touch, but beneath it, you sense the coldness of the deep rock, the part that has been here for thousands of years, untouched by day or night. You imagine that long ago, when the Sphinx was newly carved, there might have been other monuments nearby, perhaps smaller guardians, perhaps temples aligned with the stars. Over time they could have been dismantled, their stones repurposed for other structures, their memory fading from the minds of those who lived here. The Sphinx remained only because it was too massive, too anchored to the bedrock to be moved. The thought makes you picture the builders again, not the pharaoh's workers of 2500 BCE, but the older, unknown people who may have stood here in a greener world. They would have known the cycles of the sky, the movements of the sun and moon, the floods of the Nile's ancient ancestors. Perhaps their world was knit together by a network of such sites, each one a point in a vast web of meaning and connection, stretching across continents. You glance upward. The sun is higher now, and the light is catching in the eyes of the Sphinx, making them seem almost alive. It's not hard to imagine that you were carved to meet this exact moment, to look toward the rising sun as a symbol of renewal, of the endless cycle of day and night, life and death, rise and fall. The wind begins to move, warmer now, carrying with it the smell of sand and the faint metallic scent of the stone as it heats. You close your eyes and the smell transports you, not forward or backward in time, but sideways, to another place entirely. You see stone towers rising from a mist-covered hill, walls made of blocks so large you wonder how they were ever lifted. You see a coastal cliff with geometric shapes carved into its face, some now half swallowed by the sea. You see a jungle where tree roots wrap around the remains of something once great, its carvings almost erased by moss and vines. When you open your eyes, the Sphinx is there again, and you feel a deep connection between it and all those other places. It's as though they are part of a single conversation across time, each one telling a fragment of a story that has been scattered by the winds and waters of the ages. You wonder whether these ancient sites share more than mystery. Could they be the remnants of a world linked together by knowledge now lost? Not in the sense of a single, global empire, but as pieces of a shared understanding, of astronomy, geometry, stoneworking, that transcended geography. If so, then the Sphinx's builders were part of something much larger, something that left traces on every continent. The warmth of the morning grows, the desert is waking. You hear distant sounds, faint voices, the shuffle of feet, the first stirrings of the modern world returning to this ancient place. Yet here, beside the Sphinx, you still feel cocooned in the quiet of the past. Your gaze lingers on the monument's flanks, the grooves carved deep by ancient rains. They are so unlike the erosion marks on the temples nearby. Those other structures speak of the Egypt you know, of pharaohs and dynasties, of a dry climate and a stable desert. The Sphinx speaks of another Egypt entirely, one that existed before the desert claimed this land. And maybe that's the most humbling thought of all, that we live on top of so many forgotten worlds. Each age leaves its layer, and the one beneath is hidden until some crack in the present lets us see through. The Sphinx is such a crack. A place where the surface of history has worn thin enough to reveal the shape of something older beneath. You step back once more, taking in the full form of the Guardian. The sun's warmth makes the stone glow softly, almost as if it's holding the light within itself. You realize that the same light you see now has touched this monument every day for thousands of years, carrying with it the memory of every sunrise the Sphinx has ever watched. It is an unbroken chain, the same star rising, the same shadow falling, the same gaze fixed on the horizon. And somewhere in that chain are the mornings when the land was green, the rains were heavy, and the people who built this Guardian still walked here. You breathe deeply, letting the warmth sink into your skin, and feel a quiet gratitude. Not just for the mystery, but for the fact that it still stands, still speaks in its own way. You may never know the full story, but perhaps that is not the point. Perhaps the point is to keep asking, to keep listening, to keep walking these ancient places and letting them remind you how much of our past is still waiting to be found. And as you turn your gaze back to the Sphinx's face, you can almost believe that it knows exactly what you're thinking, and is choosing, for now, to keep its secrets. The morning light has now taken full possession of the plateau. The shadows are shorter, sharper, and the golden wash over the Sphinx has deepened into something richer, a colour that makes the stone seem alive, as if it were warming from the inside out. The air carries a new weight as the chill of night fades, replaced by the first hints of the day's heat. But here, standing before the Sphinx, you still feel the echo of cooler hours, and your mind lingers on the stories it might remember. Your thoughts turn to one story in particular, one that doesn't belong to Egypt alone. The story of the flood. Not the gentle swelling of the Nile that fed the crops of the pharaohs, but a world-changing deluge, the kind spoken of in myths from nearly every corner of the earth. The Egyptians told their own version, hidden in fragments of older tales. Some spoke of waters that rose high enough to cover the land, leaving only the sacred mound, the first piece of earth to emerge from the chaos. In Mesopotamia, the Sumerians and Babylonians told of a great ship built to save life from the waters sent by the gods. In the Hebrew tradition, Noah built an ark. The Greeks told of Deucalion and Pyrrha, who repopulated the world after a flood sent by Zeus. In the Americas, there are stories of canoes carrying survivors over endless seas, and in the Pacific Islands, of mountain peaks barely visible above the waves. The patterns are unmistakable. Cultures that never met, separated by oceans and millennia, all remembering a time when the world was washed clean. Perhaps each is only a metaphor, a way to explain cycles of destruction and renewal. But perhaps they are memories passed down through generations of an event that truly happened in our distant past. You look at the deep water-shaped grooves in the Sphinx's body and feel the weight of that possibility. What if these are not just the marks of ordinary rain, but the scars of storms born in the aftermath of such a catastrophe? The climate scientists speak of the Younger Dryas, a period around 12,000 years ago, when the world shifted suddenly from warmth back into near Ice Age conditions before warming again. Some theories say it was triggered by an asteroid impact or massive glacial meltwater flooding into the oceans, events that could have unleashed rain like the world had never seen. If the Sphinx stood here then, It would have faced skies dark with clouds, rivers raging where deserts now lie, rain falling not for hours but for years. You imagine the stone under that deluge, its surface softening, the channels forming, the body slowly changing shape as the storms carve their memory into its flanks. And if that is true, then the people who built it must have lived in a world very different from this one. A world green and fertile, rich with life. Perhaps they had no warning of what was coming, or perhaps they knew, and the Sphinx was part of their answer, a marker, a sentinel, a way to endure what they could not. You walk around to the monument's side, your fingers tracing the largest of the vertical grooves. You can fit your whole hand inside, your palm pressing against stone that has been shaped by water for thousands of years. It feels almost soft under your touch, not in its substance, but in the way it carries its history, as if the stone has learned to yield just slightly to the forces that pass over it. You think of how the flood stories always speak of what comes after. The waters recede. The survivors step onto new land. They begin again. The flood is never the end. It is the reset. Could the Egypt of the pharaohs have been one of those restarts, a civilization rising in the shadow of something older, carrying faint echoes of a time before the deluge? The myths of Zep Tepi, the first time, might fit here. Perhaps the gods who appeared to teach humanity after the flood were the remnants of an earlier culture, bringing with them fragments of lost knowledge, how to cut stone, how to watch the stars, how to mark the turning of the year with monuments that would last for ages. The Sphinx could have been their masterpiece, inherited and repurposed by the kings who came later. The sun is higher now, and the desert's colours have shifted. The pale sands are brighter, the limestone warmer in tone. The Sphinx's features stand out more clearly. The curve of the jawline, the faint lines of the headdress, the smoothness of the pores where restoration has replaced the original stone. You step closer to the front again, standing between those pores, and look upward into its gaze. It is not difficult to imagine it watching over a world remade by flood waters. The surrounding land would have been damp, green in places, perhaps dotted with lakes left behind as the waters pulled away. In that world, the Sphinx might not have been an anomaly in the desert, but one of many great works all standing in a land that had just begun to heal. You wonder whether its orientation toward the east, toward the rising sun, was chosen for symbolic reasons connected to that rebirth. The sun rises, the waters recede, the world is made new. Every dawn would have been a reminder of survival. Every shadow it cast in the morning light would have stretched into the new day like a promise. The wind shifts again, warm now, stirring the sand around your feet. You hear distant sounds, the slow stir of modern life returning to the plateau. But here, within the Sphinx's silent watch, the echoes of ancient floods seem closer. You can almost hear the rush of water, the creak of boats, the shouts of people gathering what they could before the land disappeared. Perhaps the flood did not erase everything. Perhaps it left behind scattered survivors, each carrying a piece of a larger story, pieces that became the myths of later cultures. The Sphinx might be one of the rare physical survivors of that world, a monument not just to a people, but to the turning point between two ages. You let your gaze linger on its weathered flanks, the way the morning sun catches in the channels carved by water. They are like pages in a book whose language we've almost forgotten. We can see the shapes of the letters, but the meaning slips away unless we are willing to imagine. And maybe that is what the Sphinx is asking for. Not blind belief in one version of its story, but the willingness to imagine, to think beyond the narrow span of written history, to remember that the human story is as wide and as deep as the earth itself. The warmth of the day is building. Soon the desert will hum with heat, and the softness of the morning will give way to the hard light of noon. But for now, there is still time to stand here, to breathe in the quiet, to feel the presence of something that has seen the world not once but twice, before and after the waters came. And as you take a slow breath, you realize that the Sphinx does not ask you to choose between history and myth. It is both. It is the stone and the story, the survivor and the symbol. And perhaps, like the flood, its meaning will shift with each telling, carrying forward what matters most, that we have been here before and we may be here again. The sun is climbing higher now, washing the Sphinx in a warm, steady glow. The golden light softens the rough edges of its body while sharpening the lines of its face, as though the stone is revealing one truth and hiding another at the same time. Around you, the desert is beginning to stir, the faint crunch of distant footsteps, the muted voices of early visitors. But here, in the shadow of the monument, the stillness remains intact. It's in this stillness that another thought rises, not about the rains or the floods, but about silence itself, about how, for so long, questions about the Sphinx's true age have been met not only with debate, but with resistance. You think of the scholars, the researchers, the independent thinkers who have stood here and pointed to the grooves in the stone, the mismatch between climate and erosion, the lack of early records, and you think of how often those voices have been quieted, dismissed or ignored. In archaeology, as in so many fields, the past is not just a matter of evidence, it's also a matter of narrative. The story of human history has been built carefully over generations, layer upon layer, until it feels solid and immovable. Suggesting that the Sphinx is thousands of years older than we've been told is like pulling at a thread that runs through the entire tapestry. The fear, perhaps, is that if one part unravels, much more will follow. And so, alternative ideas are sometimes treated not as possibilities, but as threats. Museums guard their displays, universities guard their syllabi, experts guard the dates and timelines they have staked their careers upon. The official story becomes not just a record of the past, but a foundation of authority, and authority is not given up easily. You imagine a quiet room, somewhere far from the desert, where decisions about history are made. In that room, the Sphinx is a safe object, securely placed in the reign of Khafra, its origins tidy, its meaning clear. Moving it to an earlier time, linking it to an unknown civilization, would open the door to too many unanswerable questions. It would force historians to rewrite not just Egyptian history, but the history of humanity's rise. Perhaps this is why evidence that doesn't fit is sometimes left in the margins. Perhaps this is why the idea of an ancient lost civilization remains in the realm of speculation, myth, and fringe theories. To keep the known past in order, the unknown is kept silent. You walk slowly along the Sphinx's flank, your hand brushing the stone. The channels in the rock feel almost like the lines on an old map, marks that guide you to places others have chosen not to explore. You wonder how many other monuments, other clues, have been smoothed over or left unexamined because they do not match the accepted script. The light shifts as the sun rises, filling the grooves with shadow. They look deeper now, as though the stone is quietly offering its own testimony in defiance of the official record. You think of the handful of researchers who have insisted on listening to that testimony, who have endured criticism and even ridicule for following the evidence where it led. Their work has not rewritten the textbooks, not yet, but it has kept the questions alive, and maybe that's all the Sphinx needs, not for the truth to be shouted, but for it to be remembered. A monument this old does not work on the timescale of human argument. It can wait. It can endure the silences and the contradictions. Long after this generation's debates have faded, it will still be here, holding its secrets, ready to be heard by the next. You stop near its great pause again and tilt your head back to look at the face. The expression is as inscrutable as ever, but in the morning light it almost seems to smirk, not in mockery but in quiet amusement, as if it knows how small our arguments are compared to the sweep of its existence. You remember something an old guide once said to a visitor: "The Sphinx has outlived every historian who's tried to explain it." The truth of that statement makes you smile. This monument has been watching for thousands of years. It has seen the rise and fall of countless rulers, the shifts of empires, the changing faces of those who claim to know its story. And through it all, it has remained exactly where it is, unmoved by both wind and words. The breeze picks up slightly, carrying the dry scent of the desert. You breathe it in and feel the warmth of the sun settling on your shoulders. The modern world may prefer neat timelines, but the Sphinx belongs to a deeper kind of history, one written in erosion, in alignment with the sun, in the memory of rain that hasn't fallen here for thousands of years. You think of the visitors who will come later today, cameras in hand, eager for photographs, but perhaps not for questions. Many will see only what they've been told to see. A monument built by a pharaoh in a time they've read about in guidebooks. They'll walk away satisfied, their understanding of the past unchallenged. But a few, just a few, will linger in its shadow, feeling the same pull you feel now, sensing that the official story is only one layer of something far larger. And maybe that's all it takes. Not everyone needs to see the hidden layers. Not everyone needs to follow the thread into the dark. If enough people keep asking, keep wondering, keep looking closely at the marks the rain left on the stone, then the silence will not be total. You step back, taking in the whole figure once more. The sun is strong now, casting a long shadow behind the monument. In that shadow, the heat hasn't yet reached, and the coolness of the night still lingers. You stand there for a long moment, half in light, half in shade, and it strikes you that this is exactly where the Sphinx lives, between the known and the unknown, between the history we accept and the history we avoid. The breeze dies down again, and the quiet settles back in. You know the debates will continue far from here, in conference rooms, in journals, in late-night conversations between those who dare to wonder. But here, on the plateau, the Sphinx doesn't need to take sides. It simply waits, letting the years wear away the noise until only the stone, the shadow, and the silence remain. And as you stand there, you understand that maybe the greatest proof of its age isn't in the erosion, or the myths, or the absence of records. It's in the patience, a patience so vast it makes human resistance seem small, a patience that knows the truth will outlast the silence. The sun has claimed the plateau fully now. The pale blush of dawn is gone, replaced by the steady gold of morning. The Sphinx glows in that light, every weathered surface alive with subtle shadows, every repaired stone visible like a scar that has healed but never disappeared. You stand in front of it, feeling the warmth against your skin, and the air is already beginning to carry the first whispers of the desert's heat. The voices of other visitors are further away now, faint and scattered. You're close enough to the Sphinx that the sound of the wind brushing past its great paws almost seems louder. The breeze isn't strong, just enough to remind you of the stillness that dominates this place. And in that stillness, you sense something deeper, not absence, but presence. For thousands of years, the Sphinx has kept its own counsel. It has not spoken its builder's name. It has not explained the meaning of its gaze or the scars on its body. It has offered no inscription, no secret chamber with an untouched scroll to settle the matter. It has simply been here, through floods of sand and centuries of neglect, through the noise of modern cities and the quiet of endless nights. You wonder what that kind of silence feels like, to be so full of history and yet say nothing. The stone holds every storm, every repair, every passing shadow, but it does not tell you which moments mattered most. It lets you decide. It allows your questions to hang in the air unanswered, and in that choice, it turns the act of looking into a kind of meditation. You step to the side, letting your hand rest gently on the limestone. The surface is rough in some places, smoother in others, as though the stone has its own landscape. The warmth from the sun seeps into your palm, and you realize this is the same surface touched by countless hands before yours. Workers, priests, soldiers, travelers, scholars. Some of those touches were acts of care, others of curiosity, perhaps even of reverence. The stone has absorbed them all without judgment. Looking up, you meet the Sphinx's eyes again. They're not perfectly preserved. The details have been softened by erosion and time, yet there is still a depth there, as if it is looking past you, through you, towards something far away. You remember that its gaze is fixed on the east, aligned to greet the rising sun. It has watched that same star lift itself over the horizon every single day for thousands of years, through seasons of drought and seasons of flood, through ages of plenty and ages of collapse. It makes you think about how small the scale of a human life is compared to this. The things we call long, a century, a dynasty, are brief flickers here. To the Sphinx they are moments, gone almost before they're noticed, and yet it remembers them all in the way a mountain remembers the storms that pass over it, not in detail, but in the way the shape changes slowly with each passing. The sound of the wind shifts again, and for just a heartbeat, it feels like the air itself is speaking. Not in words, but in a low hum you feel more. Then hear, as though the stone has its own resonance. You close your eyes and let that sensation fill you. The world around you blurs, the distant voices, the warmth of the sun, even the texture of the sand under your feet. There is only the hum, and in it, a sense of connection to something larger than yourself. When you open your eyes again, the Sphinx is unchanged, yet somehow different. You realize that the monument's silence is not empty. It is deliberate. It is not withholding its truth. It is keeping it alive by not forcing it into the narrow shape of human explanation. In this way, the Sphinx is a kind of mirror. What you see in it says as much about you as it does about the past. You think of all the people who have stood here, each bringing their own perspective. To some, it is a work of art. To others, a holy sight. To others still, a puzzle to be solved. The Sphinx absorbs all these interpretations, holds them in its stillness, and waits for each generation to bring their own. Perhaps that is why it endures, because it belongs to no single story, no single time. Your gaze drifts down to the base, where sand has gathered in the seams between stones. These small drifts remind you that the desert is never still, even when it appears calm. Over the centuries, it has buried the Sphinx more than once, covering all but its head. It has revealed it again when the winds shifted. The sand's patience matches the stones, two forces in quiet conversation over millennia. You try to imagine what it must have been like for those who first uncovered it after a long burial. To see a face emerging from the dunes, to realize it was connected to a body, to wonder who or what could have placed such a thing here. That moment of discovery must have been as surreal as the monument itself. And perhaps, in that moment, they felt something like what you feel now, the sense of being in the presence of something that remembers far more than it will ever say. The heat is beginning to press more firmly now, but you don't move away. You let the warmth soak into you, grounding you in this place. The Sphinx's shadow has shortened in the rising sun, yet it still falls across your feet, cool against the sand. Standing here, half in the light, half in shadow, you can't help but feel that you are sharing in its watch, just for this brief moment, part of its endless vigil. Your thoughts slow. The questions you've carried about who built it, when, and why feel less urgent. There will be time to think about them again later. For now, it's enough to simply be here, to let the stone's silence steady you, to breathe with the desert. You look up one more time at its face. The features are worn, the details blurred, yet the expression remains calm, composed, eternal. You realize this is what makes the Sphinx so powerful. It is not just the mystery of its origin or the theories about its age. It is the way it holds itself in absolute stillness, untouched by the passing of days, untouched by the noise of human certainty or doubt. And as you stand there, the quiet hum of the place still in your bones, you understand that you're not here to get answers. You're here to remember what it feels like to stand before something that has outlived empires, languages, and even the land's own climate. You are here to feel the weight of time, not as a burden, but as a reminder that there is a rhythm to the world that moves far slower and far deeper than the one we live in each day. The Sphinx does not tell you this in words. It tells you in stone, in shadow, in the silence that holds all the voices of the past. And as you take a slow, steady breath, you realize that the silence is exactly where the truth has been all along. The sun has risen high enough now that its light feels steady and unwavering. The golden glow that earlier seemed soft has deepened into something stronger, casting a firm presence over the Sphinx. The heat is beginning to settle into the stone, and the air carries a faint shimmer above the sand. Yet even as the world around it brightens and shifts, the Sphinx remains, as it has through every day in its long history, calm, watchful, and unhurried. You stand back a little now, giving yourself space to take in the whole monument at once. From a distance, it is even more imposing. The sheer size of it, the length of its body, the height of its head, commands attention, but there's something else too. Something in its stillness that draws you in. You've stood here for what feels like hours, and yet it doesn't feel like time wasted. The Sphinx doesn't demand your attention in a loud way. It simply holds you, gently, until you realize you've been looking longer than you intended. You think about all the travellers who have made their way here over thousands of years. Some would have come with offerings, believing the monument to be a divine presence. Others would have arrived with tools, ready to repair the damage caused by wind, water, or war. And many, perhaps most, would have simply come to see, to stand where you are now, to feel what you're feeling. In the quiet warmth of the morning, you find yourself imagining one of those travellers from centuries ago. Perhaps it's a merchant from a far-off land, having crossed deserts and rivers to reach this place he has heard about in whispers. He walks slowly toward the Sphinx, the sand crunching softly under his sandals. He carries with him not a map, not a plan, but only the hope that the sight of this monument will tell him something about the world he lives in, or perhaps about himself. In your mind, you see him stop where you stand now. He tilts his head back, taking in the same gaze that meets your own. The world he knows is smaller than yours in distance, but no less full of wonder. To him, the Sphinx is a marvel beyond explanation, proof that there are forces, human or otherwise, that can shape the earth into something that lasts far beyond a lifetime. And perhaps that is what you are meant to feel here, the humbling truth that you are only one in a long line of people who have stood before this stone guardian. The questions you carry are not new. The awe you feel is not yours alone. Every person who has paused here, from the earliest wanderers to the most modern traveller, has shared in the same quiet moment, the same awareness of being in the presence of something that will outlast them. The breeze shifts, and you hear a faint rustle in the sand. The desert is never silent. Not truly. It speaks in small, patient ways. You realize that the sound of the wind against the stone is probably the closest thing to a heartbeat the Sphinx has. That faint, constant whisper has been here for as long as the monument has stood, shaping it, touching it, reminding it of the world that moves even when it does not. You walk again to the side of the Sphinx, tracing your gaze along its length. The sun now casts shorter shadows in the grooves carved by ancient rain. The channels look less like deep cuts and more like gentle flows, the way water shapes a riverbed over time. Your fingers hover just above the stone, not quite touching this time, as if you are tracing an invisible line from the past into the present. The repairs stand out more clearly in the daylight. Blocks from different eras, different quarries, even different hands have been fitted into the original structure. They tell their own quiet story, not of the builders, but of the caretakers. Each repair is an act of faith that the monument is worth saving, worth passing on to those who will come next. And in that way, the Sphinx is not only the work of its original creators, but also the work of everyone who has loved it enough to keep it standing. You think of how strange it is that something so vast can inspire such small, personal feelings. The longer you look, the more it feels as though the Sphinx is not here to declare its power, but to remind you of your own place in the flow of time. You're neither the first nor the last to stand here. You are part of a much longer story, a story whose beginning you will never know, and whose end you will never see. The warmth of the sun presses against your back, and you close your eyes for a moment. In the darkness, you imagine the sound of footsteps on stone. Not yours, but those of people from thousands of years ago. You imagine voices in a language you cannot understand, the clinking of tools, the murmur of prayer. You see the Sphinx as they saw it, perhaps newer, perhaps already worn, but always present. When you open your eyes, the sight has shifted slightly, changing the way the stone surface catches the sun. It reminds you that even the smallest changes in light and shadow can alter the way we see something. And perhaps the same is true for history. A small shift in perspective can make the same monument tell a completely different story. The thought makes you linger longer, watching how the light continues to move across the stone. You notice things you hadn't before, a faint crack along the jawline, the way one of the repair blocks sits slightly crooked, the subtle slope of the headdress where erosion has worn it down unevenly. These are not imperfections. They are the marks of time, the proof that the Sphinx has lived through more than one lifetime, more than one world. The desert air is warmer now, but it carries a certain clarity. Every breath you take feels grounding, steadying. You realize that this is part of the Sphinx's gift. It slows you down until you match its own pace. The urgency of the outside world feels far away here. The only time that matters is the present moment, stretched wide and unbroken. And as you stand there, you begin to understand something. The Sphinx's greatest power may not be in what it reveals, but in what it teaches you to hold without knowing. The unanswered questions are not gaps to be filled, but spaces to rest in, places where your mind can wander, your imagination can breathe. The sun continues its climb, and the shadow beneath the Sphinx shrinks. Soon, the heat will fill the day, and the plateau will hum with the voices of those just arriving. But for now, you're still in that rare space between solitude and the day's noise, alone with the guardian who has watched this desert for thousands of years. And in its silent company, you feel not the weight of mystery but the comfort of it. A reminder that some truths are meant to stay just beyond reach, so that we never stop looking. The morning has fully settled into day now, yet the Sphinx seems unchanged. The sun's light clings to it, not in the fleeting way it does with the dunes, but in a steady, patient way, as though it has learned over millennia how to absorb the warmth without letting it alter its nature. The sky above is a deep, flawless blue, and the air carries the faint, dry scent of stone heating in the sun. The day is still young, but here beside the Sphinx, time feels like a slow river. You step back far enough to take in the monument in its entirety, letting your eyes travel from the curve of the paws along the long lion-like body to the calm face that has become one of the most enduring images in the world. It is a face that feels familiar, yet the familiarity is deceptive. No matter how often you look, it does not reveal itself fully. It always holds something back. The thought returns to you. The Sphinx as a survivor, not merely a relic from a specific reign or dynasty, but a being that has endured through multiple worlds, each with its own climate, its own people, its own ways of naming things. When it was new, perhaps the air was heavy with the scent of wet earth and flowering plants, the ground damp beneath the builder's feet. Then came the dry ages, when the land turned to sand and the rains vanished. The Sphinx saw both, and adapted to neither. It simply remained. The grooves in its body are more than signs of age. They are records of survival. They tell of the rains that fell in a distant epoch, the winds that came later, the repairs made by hands long gone. They speak of endurance in the face of change, of holding one's place even as the world transforms around you. You think about what it means for a civilization to survive, or not. Entire empires have risen and fallen since the Sphinx was carved. Cities have flourished, only to be abandoned and swallowed by the earth. Languages have been born, spoken, forgotten. Beliefs have shifted, Rulers have come and gone. The Sphinx has seen them all. It has watched the same human patterns repeat, the same ambitions and mistakes, the same cycles of building and erasing. And now, here you are, another in the long procession of observers standing in its shadow. The difference between you and those who came before is only in the moment, not in the essence. Like them, you are drawn by the mystery, by the unshakable presence of something older than you can measure. You close your eyes and imagine what the plateau must have looked like when the Sphinx was new. Perhaps there were other structures nearby, temples, pillars, gardens, most of which have long since vanished. You picture people moving about in that world, some working on the monument itself, others offering food or incense to it. You imagine them speaking in a language you do not understand, but the tone of their voices tells you what it meant to them: respect, awe, and perhaps even a little fear. Then you let the vision move forward, centuries at a time. You see the Sphinx half buried in sand, its body hidden, its head still keeping watch over a shifting sea of dunes. You see rulers ordering its excavation, priests walking in procession, scholars sketching its lines in their journals. You see tourists with cameras and cell phones, taking in the same gaze that has met countless others before theirs. In every vision, one thing remains constant. The Sphinx is here, always here. It is not the same stone as it was thousands of years ago. Erosion, repairs, and the slow breath of time have reshaped it, yet its essence is unchanged. It is still the guardian of the plateau, still the silent witness to all that passes. You begin to wonder if this is its true message, not the story of its creation, not the identity of its builders, but the lesson of simply enduring. In a world where everything changes, climates, governments, beliefs, even the land itself, there is a quiet power in staying. The Sphinx does not resist time, nor does it rush with it. It meets each moment as it comes and lets it pass. Your hand rests lightly against the stone, and you can feel the faint warmth it has absorbed from the sun. The texture is uneven, but that unevenness feels natural now, like the wrinkles of an ancient face. You realize you're not just touching stone, you're touching the surface of history itself. History so old that much of it has been forgotten even by those who once claimed to know it. You step back into the sunlight and let your eyes take in the wide sweep of the desert beyond. The sands stretch out in every direction, their patterns shifting with the wind, their shapes temporary and fleeting. Against that endless change, the Sphinx's permanence feels even more profound. It is not just a piece of the past, it is a point of stillness in the flow of time. The longer you stand there, the more you feel that stillness seep into you. Your own thoughts slow, matching the monument's rhythm. You no longer feel the need to rush toward answers. You no longer feel the tension of wanting to solve the riddle. You simply feel present, here, now, in the company of something that has seen the rise and fall of ages. And yet, there is still a spark of curiosity. If the Sphinx is older than the history we've written, then what else might be out there? How many other survivors are hidden beneath deserts, oceans, forests? How many other silent witnesses are waiting to be found, each carrying their own record of the world's forgotten chapters? That thought is both humbling and exciting. It makes you realize that the mystery of the Sphinx is not an isolated one. It is part of a larger, global tapestry of enigmas. The more you think about it, the more you feel that these monuments are like beacons, calling us to remember that the past is far deeper and more complex than we imagine. The sun is high now, and the day's heat is beginning to rise from the sand. The shadow of the Sphinx has shortened, but it still stretches far enough to cover your feet. Standing there, half in light and half in shadow, you feel balance between two worlds. The world you know, with its recorded history and familiar stories, and the world you can only imagine, where the Sphinx's first purpose still lives. And perhaps that is the heart of the mystery, not that it cannot be solved, but that it invites you to stand in both worlds at once, to be a traveller in time without leaving your place. It asks you to hold the known and the unknown together, just as it has done for thousands of years. As you take one last slow breath, you feel that this moment will stay with you. Not because you have learned something definitive, but because you have felt what it is to be in the presence of something greater than a single lifetime. Something that has seen storms and sunrises, floods and droughts, empires and ruins, and still stands, silent and sure. The Sphinx does not need to speak to tell its story. It is the story, carved in stone, written in shadow, and carried in the silence of its endless watch. The heat of the day has taken hold now, wrapping the plateau in a still, dry embrace. The sun burns high above, and the light is so strong it seems to erase all shadows except those carved deep into the Sphinx itself. The sky has the clarity of glass, and the air shimmers faintly above the sand. Yet here, in front of this ancient guardian, the heat is softened by the quiet. A quiet so deep it feels like a place you can step into and rest. You take a slow breath, letting the warmth sink into your bones. Around you, the desert seems endless, its dunes shifting gently in the distance. The wind is faint, almost absent, as though it too is pausing in deference to the monument. The Sphinx sits as it has for ages, its gaze fixed unshakably toward the east, toward the place where each new day begins. You've spent hours here now, enough time for the light to change, for your own thoughts to settle into the same patient rhythm the Sphinx seems to keep. In that rhythm, you feel the truth of what this place teaches, that not all questions are meant to be answered quickly, and not all stories are meant to be told in full. When you look at the Sphinx now, you see not just the stone and its scars, but the entire sweep of its existence. You see the rains that once carved the grooves in its body. You see the sand burying it, the hands uncovering it. You see generations of people, from ancient priests to modern travellers, standing where you stand now, each carrying their own wonder and their own questions. And you feel, more than ever, that its age is not only measured in years, but in the countless lives it has touched. Every moment you've spent here has been part of that ongoing story. You are one thread in a tapestry that stretches back farther than memory and will continue long after you've gone. The thought humbles you, but it also comforts you, because in the Sphinx's stillness there is a reminder that time is not only about endings, it is also about endurance. This monument has survived floods, storms, and the slow grind of centuries. It has survived being forgotten and being rediscovered. It has survived changes in the land itself, and through it all, it has remained exactly what it is: a watcher, a keeper of silence, a reminder that there are things in this world older and steadier than any human plan. You step to the side, finding a spot where the light strikes the Sphinx's face directly. The features are worn, yet the expression is unmistakable. Calm, dignified, and entirely at peace. In that face, you see a reflection of what you've been feeling all along, the ability to meet whatever comes without resistance, to hold your place without fear of what changes may arrive. The wind stirs again, light and warm, carrying with it the scent of sun-baked stone. You close your eyes and let the sound of it move through you. In that moment, you imagine the desert not as empty, but as full of the voices and footsteps of those who once lived here, full of the sound of ancient rains, full of the quiet heartbeat of the earth beneath your feet. When you open your eyes, the world is exactly as it was, but you feel different. You know you will leave this place carrying more than just images in your mind. You will carry the feeling of standing here, of being watched over by something that has seen more than you can comprehend. You will carry the lesson that not all mysteries need solving to be worth cherishing. You look one last time at the grooves carved into its body, the marks left by water in a place now ruled by sand. They are like lines of an ancient script that no one can read anymore, yet their meaning is clear in another way. They say, "We were here before you, and we will be here after you. We've seen worlds change, and we have endured." And perhaps that is the quiet message the Sphinx offers to everyone who stands here, that you too can endure, that there is strength in stillness and wisdom in silence, that some truths are carried not in words but in presence. You take a slow step back, giving yourself space for one last full view. The Sphinx rests in the unbroken light, its shadow short and sharp against the sand. Beyond it, the desert stretches into the horizon, vast and unknowable. The two seem to belong to each other, the endless land and the eternal guardian bound together by time itself. As you turn to leave, you glance back over your shoulder. The Sphinx is exactly as it was when you arrived, and yet it feels as though it has given you something. Not an answer, but an understanding. The kind that lives not in the mind, but in the heart. You walk slowly away, each step carrying you back toward the present. But a part of you stays here. A part of you will always remain in the shadow of the Sphinx, in the warmth of the stone, in the quiet that feels like it could go on forever. And as the distance grows, you let the final thought settle gently in your mind, as if the monument itself had placed it there. What else might lie hidden, waiting for us to remember? Let the question linger as you close your eyes tonight. Let it drift with you into dreams, where the desert is green again, the rains are falling, and the Sphinx is new, its face sharp against the dawn. Let us know where you're listening from tonight. We're always listening too, and as always, may the silence guide you through the past.